Soviet scientist Ivan Pavlov found that it's possible to condition dogs to have unconscious reflexes to programmed stimuli. In his best-known experiment, he conditioned a dog to salivate at the sound of a bell. What's less known about his experiments, however, is they were used by the Soviet Union and by later socialist regimes to train their followers to react to stimuli, brainwashing societies in the same way that a person trains an animal. In October 1919, Pavlov was visited by the then-rising Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin. According to the memoir, The White Nights by Boris Sokolov, Lenin believed that by conditioning his reflexes, man can be standardized, can be made to think and act according to the pattern required. Lenin declared that in place of individualism, quote, "I want the masses of Russia to follow a communistic pattern of thinking and reacting." The practical use of Pavlov's findings for socialist tyrants is in causing people to associate rewards or punishments with different triggers. These leaders can then manipulate the triggers by tying them to political agendas. The basic idea is simple: cause people to no longer think rationally, and to instead react subconsciously to key issues with set emotions. This type of agitated memory is now at the heart of propaganda tactics frequently used by legacy news outlets. This includes their full array of fake news methods and new journalism to lead people through simulated experiences and agitation propaganda to agitate the public to support certain political agendas. There are many examples of this, from fake hate crimes such as those from actor Jesse Smollett or against high school student Nick Sandmann, to false accusations like those against Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, to frame emotions behind the family separation argument that dominated coverage of illegal immigration for a time. Legacy news outlets use an image of a crying 2-year-old girl whose mother was bringing her to the United States to illegally immigrate. Time magazine even ran the image on its cover, with an alternate image to show her crying and looking at President Donald Trump. The narrative around the image was false, though. It turned out the mother and daughter were never separated at any point, and the mother had kidnapped the daughter from her father. A second tool used to frame emotions on the family separation argument was the images of, quote, kids in cages. The photo of Latin American children in cages went viral, yet these turned out to be from a protest against immigration law. The main narrative was that Trump is separating families, yet this was also framed falsely. The family separation policy was from the Obama administration, and Trump said on April 9 that he won't renew the Obama policy. What's important to remember, however, is that in conditioning people to react to political stimuli, facts don't matter. What matters is the emotional memory. Perception isn't just shaped by logic and information. It's also shaped by experience and stories that create more deeply rooted feelings. Unconsciously, people interpret reality as a series of symbols that trigger these various emotions, memories, and notions. In the cycle of meaning, which is applied to the studies of symbology, it's believed that people don't interpret reality directly, but instead through a series of symbols, onto which they have attached meaning. And there are many groups that look to alter the interpretations of these symbols. The purpose of psychological warfare is to alter the way people interpret reality. The key word there is interpret. It doesn't necessarily need to alter the information itself, just the way the information is perceived. This method of manipulation is used very openly in military strategies for psychological warfare. Methods of psychological warfare can be found in the Chinese regime's three warfares doctrine, in advertising and political messaging taught by Edward Bernays, and in new journalism tactics from the 1960s used by legacy news outlets. We can break psychological warfare down into three main tools: disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda. Disinformation can take several forms. It can include the creation of a Potemkin village, or the use of staged events, the creation of false evidence, or the creation of false conclusions based on otherwise true information. Misinformation is the outright reporting of false information. Propaganda, meanwhile, doesn't necessarily need to be true or false. Its purpose is to elicit an emotional response. With today's socialist movements, and in coverage by legacy news outlets, we can see all of these elements at play. Their collective result is that many people are unable to think rationally, and instead react to surface issues along set partisan lines. Many legacy news outlets start first with their issue. The reporters use the scientific method by creating a thesis of how the news relates to their issue. Then they interview people with leading questions, cherry-pick data, or sometimes just make things up to frame a story to fit their manufactured narrative. Just as Pavlov's dog was taught to associate the reward of food with the sound of a bell, the sad victims of political conditioning are brainwashed through the subversion of their interpretation of symbols. They are conditioned to associate their agitated emotions with targeted political issues.